Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Life of a Rebel. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Rebecca Minkoff, who is a luxury handbag, accessory, apparel designer. She's a podcaster. She's most recently an author. I want to talk a bit about that. And of course, she's just an amazing entrepreneur. And she's also someone that I have the great pleasure of calling a friend. And so Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. And I love the title because I've always felt like a rebel, even when I was trying to change the hospital's rules when I was about to give birth. And my husband was like, you got to stop there, please. They're going to take our child from us. So I love the title.
It's interesting you talk about that feeling, that self-identification of a rebel, because I've always felt the same way too. And in many ways, growing up as a rebel or growing up as an entrepreneur is somewhat of a lonely thing. At least it was for me. When I was a kid, I started a little DJ company when I was 12 years old because, well, frankly, I wanted to be a DJ and no one would hire me. And I thought this is a great way for me to start something and hire myself. And I want to ask you about that stage of your life. What was your childhood like? Did you have a first job growing up? Did you know you were an entrepreneur when you were a kid?
I definitely was entrepreneurial from the start. My mom had a slew of several businesses, and I'm going to date her, but she sold at Amway. She was a trained registered nurse, so she had a remote nursing clinic. And she also sold cast covers. Go with me here. Really fun 80s printed sleeves that you'd put over your cast. And she would sell them at the San Diego flea market. And I literally said to her one day, I was like, I want a card table and I'm going to sell things that I made. And so from the age of 6, I would go with her to the flea markets. I would have all my jewelry that I made all week or some tie-dye or puffy paint sweatshirts. No buyers, but it didn't stop me from being excited about it and planning it and being there with her each week. So definitely started at a young age.
It's interesting because I think for a lot of us that become entrepreneurs, there's either someone in our life, maybe it's a friend or a family member or a neighbor, where who we want to emulate. And it sounds like, your entrepreneurial spirit very much came from growing up and seeing your mom do that. Is that right?
I think so. We definitely had rules in our house that if we wanted anything, we had to earn it. She had a ledger in the kitchen, like a green accounting ledger, that we had to do enough chores around the house, and she kept track of the money. And so whether I liked it or not, that was how I was brought up. And so that mindset was triggered early on that, oh, I got to figure this out. If I want to make money, I got to figure that out too. If I want to buy something. So from my first sewing machine, to the fabric I would buy, everything had to be earned on my dime. And so when that's put at you, you either rise to the occasion or you don't have anything. So that's what I did.
I had a similar situation in my household growing up. My parents didn't have a lot, but whatever I wanted, they were very clear that I had to go and earn on my own. And I remember thinking how unfair it was. I had friends of mine who just seemed to get stuff. It just sort of magically appeared. They wanted the new Air Jordans or they wanted a new Stussy sweatshirt, and somehow they just always had it. And at the time, it felt like, why do I have to work for it? But in many ways, I think that's just so character building.
Yes, there were definitely those moments where, even down to my friends would get to go to the water park, on a weekend. And my mom would be like, you got to earn it. And I would be like, just give me something, if it was my ballet shoes for taking ballet, had to earn it. So it's definitely extraordinarily frustrating as a kid, but extremely valuable as a grown up. I do this to my own kids, and it's uncomfortable because I have to toy with the child in me's emotions and how terrible that feels, but also the hindsight as the adult of I don't want my kids to just think they can have everything they want.
Rebecca Minkoff as a brand has become not only a hugely successful business, but also in many ways building this brand, your namesake brand, has also become a bit of a movement. You have inspired people all over the world to take a very different path as opposed to the traditional path of how a lot of people start their brand. And I'd love to know, if you sort of take us back to those very early days of starting the Rebecca Minkoff brand, what initially inspired you to do that? And also, what was the first step in that process?
So if we go back to before the bag, I was working for a designer in New York City. This was pre-social media. And I was really efficient at my work. And so I would get 2 additional hours of the day where I was twiddling my thumbs, and after bugging everyone around the office, did they need anything, and hearing no, I would kind of go off and do my own thing. And the CEO knew that, and she was fine with it. And I started making my own things, selling them at local boutiques on the Lower East Side and sort of the West Village. And then pre 9/11, I made a shirt for my sister-in-law. I cut up and DIY'd a I Love New York shirt. She wore it at dinner. This actress saw it. I sent it to her on September 9th, 2001. She wore it on Jay Leno, and about a month later. And all that it took was Jay saying, "Hey, Jenna, I like your shirt. Tell me about it." She said my name, and it was crazy. The inbound, I mean, I guess email was a nascent form then, but the inbound interest in this shirt carried me for 9 months. That's all I did. I would get on a bike, go down to Canal Street, haggle with the tourist vendors, buy those shirts, go back to my apartment and make them, bedazzle them. And definitely
I
didn't.
mean, that's not vertical integration, right? Like, you really are not going to the source. You're actually buying them retail, right? Basically.
I was buying them at retail because it's not like you had Google then that you could just be like, where do I buy these shirts? And so I just I bought them retail and I doubled my price. And because they were cut up and made by yours truly, I could charge double. But that didn't allow me to make money. I didn't get rich off it at all. In fact, I couldn't pay my rent. But it got my name out there in a way that I could then go back to these boutiques and call up more reputable stores and say, can you see me? Will you take my appointment? So that sort of slow business building went on for 4 years. It was not really great. At the high, it was about a $250,000 apparel business. And I was not a businesswoman. I was not able to cost things efficiently. It wasn't great. And then the bag was something, again, that same actress came back to me and said, will you make a bag for me for this role that I'm doing in a film? Her having the bag is an important part of the character and you'll get a ton of visibility. So I lied and I said, yeah, I'll make a bag. Went down to the garment center, figured out through my list of contacts that I already had who could make a bag. And FedEx misdelivered. It missed the shoot entirely. And so I was like, okay, I've purchased my first designer bag because I made 2 of them. And I started wearing it around the city. And I got stopped enough that I was like, I think there's something magical here and I have to pursue this.
Did you self-identify at that point as a designer? I mean, is that something that you were sort of in your DNA? Did you introduce yourself, hey, I'm a designer at that point? Or were you just sort of, trying a bunch of different things and seeing what fit?
No, I definitely identified because I had 3 points of sale. And I had a consistent business and I had sort of a nice operation going where the website I sold on would call me and say, editors are looking for terry cloth jumpsuits. And then I'd go to my apartment, make it. It would get in the magazine because I was literally making whatever the editors wanted. So I was able to sustain, selling my items and selling them decently, not incredible, but decent.
And so you have this bag, you're walking around New York City, people are asking you, hey, this is really interesting, where did you get it? You say, I've made it. What happens next?
So a dear friend of mine was a buyer for a store in LA that was very influential. It was called Satine. And she said, I'm going to buy 12 units of this bag, and then I'm going to tell my friend at Daily Candy. Do you remember Daily Candy? Did it ever hit your radar?
I totally do. It was sort of one of the first real, kind of bloggy type sites.
Yep, it was that email of one thing every day that you needed to have, and no one was doing that. So my friend Crystal, she's now my friend, wrote about it. The title of the article is called The Catwalk of Shame because the bag was called the Morning After bag. And it hit a nerve in a way that struck women with a time in their life, whether it was the Sex and the City era, but it sold out immediately. We went back for a reorder, sold out immediately, and I said, I am going to hitch my wagon to this star. And that's also when I called my dad originally, and I said, all right, I'm no longer your loser daughter. I've got a hit. I need some money to make the next round. I need, to fund this. And he was like, we're good. I think I'm done, lending my name to your credit card. He wasn't paying the credit card bills, but he had allowed me to open a credit card.
Sure.
And he said, call your brother. And so I called my brother and he asked me typical investor questions and he loaned me $2,000 and I repaid him promptly. Then it was $5,000. And then I was like, I kind of need $20,000. And once he saw those big tickets coming at him, he's like, let's make sure we actually have like a business ID and a tax ID. Do you have a separate bank account? And then he obviously joined as my partner.
It feels like that was sort of the moment where it became real. I mean, your brother came over and joined you. You set up this company. One of the things that's interesting is, we're really fortunate to get this amazing perspective on Shopify, where we see more than 1 million stores. And one of the industries that I think is probably the toughest to break into seems to be sort of the fashion industry. It feels like it is fairly an exclusive industry, and I'm curious about. Did you feel like an imposter in that industry, or did you just sort of walk in and not give a shit?
It was 100% imposter. Back then, the only way to get credibility or become popular was Anna Wintour would say, "You're in Vogue," or Barney's would deem you, or Bergdorf Goodman. They all three had a power that would put a lot of wind behind the sails of a designer. And I didn't have that. And I really became of relevance from my consumer. And I think it coincided with social media. I think it coincided with us being able to talk directly to her via Facebook, Twitter, then Instagram. And so that's who got me here. I mean, there was a still very popular forum called the Purse Forum. And I stumbled upon it one day because I got a Google alert and I saw these women talking about me. And there was thousands of them. And I was like, well, I guess I should make a login and talk to them. And at first they couldn't believe me. And then it became this dialogue where we were crowdsourcing before that was a term. They'd say, can you make the purple bag with the yellow zipper? I'd be like, if 20 of you give me your credit card right now, I'll go do it. And we would fund these massive orders for us at the time that kept the lights on. But we also had a deep relationship with these women. So I'm literally here because of Daily Candy and that Purse Forum as the kind of original things that kind of brought the brand and stabilized it.
And I think what some folks don't actually realize is at the time, that was incredibly innovative. I mean, today, the idea of creating a direct-to-consumer brand, not that it's easy to do, but you see a lot of that out there. And the business model of direct-to-consumer is now becoming more of a mainstay for fashion, for brands, for a bunch of different categories of product. But in those days, the idea of disintermediation was really, really unique and innovative. And actually, as I sort of think about all of our chats over the years you and I have been having, one thing that I think is so interesting, and I'm curious where this comes from, is you seem to constantly be embracing new technology, whether that's going direct to consumer and crowdsourcing before any crowdsourcing platforms existed back in the day, or even more recently in terms of using something like OnlyFans to showcase your new collection. How does sort of that idea of cutting edge technology or cutting edge business model, how does that play a role in how you sort of live your life day to day?
So I'll definitely say that the idea to log on to the Purse Forum or do these crowdsourcing was definitely not a strategy. It was like, oh, there's 100 women right now that'll order a bag. Great, let's do it. I think that the later forms of technology and the bringing of that into fashion, full credit to my brother. I think in the same way that I can tell you the shirt's going to be a hit this summer, he could know what trends were coming in technology because that was his background. And so whether it was the store of the future or our wearables, or the drones we had at our shows early on when people thought we were crazy, those were all his, big ideas. Clearly, we've been working next to each other for the last 15 years, so I've definitely learned a lot from him. And so when I now see a new platform, whether it's an OnlyFans or a Clubhouse or marketplace technologies, that we want to integrate into our site, I think it's natural for me to go, oh, yep, that's the right time to do this. So we definitely do a lot of sharing. And then I think that because so many companies see that we're willing to take those risks, we get a lot of inbound of the newest, hottest, latest, because there's many huge companies that are just scared, right? They're scared to fall flat on their face and be the only ones on Snapchat with Taco Bell like we were, It feels like there's a sense of courage that you and Uri have, which is that you're willing to test things, you're willing to fail. And I mean, that is at the very core of any great entrepreneur is this appetite for risk, but also this understanding that failure is actually the discovery of something that didn't work, and that's okay, and you'll learn from that. That's one of the things that I love about how you've built this, and I think it's one of the reasons that you inspire so many other entrepreneurs inside and outside of the fashion industry. That you had drones before anyone even thought about drones. The store of the future, I mean, most people don't realize this, but now people are talking about augmented reality and virtual reality and digital fitting rooms. But you've been doing this for years. Yeah, we've been doing it for a while. It's interesting for us to test and see what sticks. Not everything is going to stick. I still firmly believe I don't think a woman's ever going to put on a headset and shop with no ancillary, sensory contact. But who knows, if that's our future. I think that has value. We just worked with a company called Riot Labs, which is owned by Yahoo, so that you could go online and see an AR experience of a garment 360. And I think if that could be embedded on websites, that would be incredibly valuable.
One of the things you and I also share is that, we started with these little companies and in both cases, both with Shopify and with the Rebecca Minkoff brand, they've grown to be, category leaders and have grown to be, in some cases, incumbents in their industry. And I'm curious, as the business has grown so much, so drastically, what were some of the major growing pains that you encountered, and what are some of the things that have been really, really surprising to you as you sort of encountered these different milestones in the business?
Oh my gosh. Let me just say that the growing pains never stop. I have a newsletter on LinkedIn called "You Can't Make This Shit Up" because I say it once a week. The hurdles that we encounter. So I think first and foremost, we chose to bootstrap. Again, when we launched, VC funding wasn't a thing. Yes, private equity was investing in brands, but not at the way it is now. So for the first 7 years, we just never had enough cash. There was just, to keep up with that growth was almost impossible. My brother had to mortgage his house. He maxed out his credit cards. We leaned on a credit line that my parents' business hadn't used. And so we were leveraged everywhere. And so that was very uncomfortable. Then came the private equity investment in 2012, and the mandate was grow at all costs. Don't worry about margin. Who needs a margin? And that was very trendy. Just pump a company full of money and, grow at a loss, and then we'll sell it later. And I'll never forget the day when that sentiment changed. And it was like, no, you have to be profitable. And we were like, cool, okay, we'll go back and re-engineer the entire company. So those are just two extreme examples of you start on a track and then suddenly you have to shift, and you don't get to turn profitable overnight.
One of the things that is obviously a big part of the stories we're talking about here is the idea of partnership, and particularly the partnership you have with Uri and your brother. Working with family for a lot of entrepreneurs is something that is just, it's part of the journey, because frankly, at the beginning, you don't really have employees, you don't really have people that you can afford to pay. You can't really pay salaries. And so whether it's on the funding side, friends and family, or it's on the actual, hey, can you come help do bookkeeping? Toby's mother-in-law very famously has done bookkeeping for Shopify in the early days. And that was just part of it. But obviously, it can be really challenging, despite it being rewarding as well. For people that are listening to this, that are thinking about starting a business or working with family members, what are some of the things that you think about, if you were to give them advice on that particular topic?
Yeah, so I think when you're a sibling, it definitely brings in an extra added layer of potential minefield. So first and foremost, just know that whoever your partner is, you're going to be spending more time with them than you are your actual partner or your family. And so I think it's really important to set up ground rules, how you speak to each other, how you act when things get stressful. Do you blame each other? I think there were many years where there was a lot of this to each other, which didn't create a healthy dynamic in the workplace and outside of it. And so, my brother and I elected many years ago to hire almost a business couples counselor, where we would meet once a year, air our grievances.
Tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people. Now you're going to hear about it.
Come through that at the end with like an agreement of, this is how we're going to behave. This is, what you can't take away from me. I'm going to respect you, whatever, all the things that, would set each other off. So set those ground rules early on. And then I will say, on the flip side, in one of my other companies, the Female Founder Collective, I also have a business partner. And you can have the same disagreements and arguments, but that little bit of sibling, I know how to really get under your skin, doesn't exist. which I think only a sibling can do to one another. So be nice to
Yeah,
your
they can,
sibling.
siblings can they can cut deep in a way because they know what deep means, and they understand sort of what are the things that you most what are sacred to you in a way that a business partner that's a professional partner would never know. But on that topic of sort of coaching and I guess mentorship, one of the things that I find most interesting about your approach is, and I've told you that mentorship to me is really, really important. And it's frankly, it's propelled me forward in these amazing ways. The fact that I get a chance to spend time with people like Seth Godin to pick his brain and to understand how he sees the world has been instrumental to me. But I've heard you talk about, and you've said this to me a couple times, that you have a very different approach to mentors, almost anti-mentorship. And I think that's I think it's so interesting the way you think about that. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I think it's how mentorship is being marketed now. I think to an aspiring college student, mentorship to them is, I'm going to email Rebecca or Harley and I'm going to say, can I have coffee with you? And can you give me the keys to success? Can you give me the last 15 years on a platter? And I'm going to go have a great career. And I've met so many young women who are like, can you just sit down with me? Can we talk? And I'm like, you know what? That is the most invaluable thing I could do for you. Yeah. Because what you need is you need to speak to someone on my team that's a manager or my receptionist or, my
an individual contributor, someone who's actually doing the work day in and day out, who can say, here's how we do digital marketing right now.
Exactly. And not only that, if you know you're an excellent designer, then don't go get mentored by a designer. Go get mentored by every single other part of someone in that company, because it's all that stuff that you don't know that's going to hold you back. And I'm so grateful. My first internship, every few weeks, she would switch me into a different part of the company. So I think get your mentorship from every other area that you're not confident in.
Yeah, I get similar emails, maybe not as many as you do, but I get a lot of emails asking about, I want to start a software company. I want to build the next Shopify. And, the same thing. I want to have coffee with you, Harley, or I want to have a Zoom call with you, and I want to chat about this. And the first thing I sort of say is, well, like, if you want to understand Shopify, go become a Shopify merchant. Go start a business. Right. You don't need anyone's permission to do that. You don't need any money. For $29, you can start. And at that point, even if you don't make millions of dollars, even if you just have somewhat of a recurring revenue business for a couple of months, the amount of information and insight that you will learn from that experience is so much more than I can ever provide you with in a 20-minute coffee chat.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, one of the things I talk about in my book is be very direct with your questions. Like, I think if you know exactly what you're asking for, if you're in the room with you or me, what's the one thing you need an answer on versus like, how do I get started in fashion? Yeah. I think it's like, just be more direct in your exact need at that exact moment.
Your podcast, Superwoman, it showcases and really it highlights some of the most successful women's stories. And I'm curious, you have a lot going on. You have a lot on your plate right now, whether it's the Female Founder Collective, it's the new book, which I want to talk about in just a second. Why did you decide to do this podcast? What inspired you to start this thing?
So first I want to be real about the time, because I think it also can set people up to fail when they're like, how are they doing all that? So after I had my third kid in 2018, we made a very important change within the design room. I used to have 18 reports. Now I have 1. And I think that was instrumental because it was impossible to be worrying about the thread count of the shirt and the Pantone color and the puff while I'm on a plane doing a speaking gig or whatever. So we really made someone who's a veteran of this industry in charge, and I still get my inspiration. I still see everything. I still am with the team, but I'm not doing the day-to-day management. So that freed up my time in a way that I was able to spend more time giving back and mentoring young women through this podcast. So the initial impetus was I was having these packed audiences in my stores where I was doing the same thing as a way to get people into the store. It was a community play. And I was like, there's got to be a more efficient way to do this. If we have standing room only, I'm sure there's a bigger audience. So I launched the podcast at the end of 2018 with the idea that I know how hard it is. I know the failures I've had, and I want other women to see that there are examples of incredibly successful, talented, intelligent women who have fallen flat on their face over and over. They've, gotten back up, or they haven't, and here's why. And so to be able to tell those women's stories inspires me, and it's inspired so many young women who encounter that like roadblock and like, should I give up? And then they listen to the story and they're like, you know what? She did it. And look at her now. And so that's kind of the goal of the podcast.
As you sort of look back and do a bit of a retro on all the amazing things that you've done, is there one particular thing that you're most proud of?
Ooh, one? I guess at the end of the day, and this is not to denigrate what I've built and what my brother and the team have built at Rebecca Minkoff, but I would love to have a bigger legacy than she's the handbag lady. I think that, anything I can do to help out another woman or a man get to that next level of success or not quit, I think is a valuable thing. And so whether that's the humanitarian in me or whatever, I think that I would like that legacy to also be just as celebrated as the most known crossbody lady that's ever lived.
So Rebecca, I want to hear a little bit more about the book. When's it coming out? And tell me a bit about it.
Yeah. So first of all, the title, Fearless. People might be like, well, I have fear all the time. And I wrote that book and that title because I do too. But what I had to do, and earlier we spoke about it, is I had to break all the rules in this industry to succeed. And so the book is my 21 rules on what I ended up doing as I look back at the 15 years I've been in business. It's a little semi-autobiographical, but really give yourself permission to stop asking for permission. If you want to go do something, go do it. Or like I said, ask for what you need, not just general. So very applicable, easy rules. And it's not just for people in fashion, it's for anyone. So hopefully you might have fear, but after reading this book, you're like, again, take the parachute off and fly. So that's the goal. It comes out June 15th, but we have a special pre-order offer now. If you go to our website and take advantage of it, because we're not going to do that after it's out.
Amazing. We will buy 250 books for Life of a Rebel listeners and viewers, just because, frankly, that topic, that idea of being fearless, that idea of going into the fear as opposed to trying to go around it, I think is so important and so deeply tied into the entrepreneurial conditions. And this idea of making it more accessible, that anyone can participate in it, it's made more real when you start to talk and hear from people like you about, well, this is what I've done, but there's also been a lot of failures along the way. And I'm curious, we talked about mentorship earlier, but you and I have had this great fortune of being able to talk and meet some of the most incredible human beings on the planet. Is there a piece of advice or something that you received by way of feedback, either early in your career or even more recently, that has really stuck with you? Is there something that if you're going to share one thing with the entrepreneurs that are watching today, that you're like, just know this?
Yeah. So I think that we approached a lot of our innovations later on with some mix of trepidation, because we were going to be the first to do whatever it was, when we were going to rewire our entire company and have it be see now, buy now, and show in season. And we would sit there for days mulling it over. Should we do it? Should we not? Should we have a blogger in our show? Should we have multiple bloggers? Should we sit them front row when everyone hates them? And the stakes seemed very high. When Saks Fifth Avenue says, we will no longer carry your products if you talk to your customers, or if you work with that blogger, we can no longer carry you in the store, or a magazine, we will no longer cover you. So the stakes seemed high. And we had a consultant back about almost 8 years ago that said, every single time you guys tried to follow what the industry said, you lost. You had to do the fancy runway shows with the dresses that no one would wear. You make red carpet stuff when your customer literally is buying a $195 bag, like all these things that we thought we had to be. And he said, here are many examples of when you went your own way, what happened? And he said that, and I was like, get this backpack off. I'm going to free fall from now on. And so that's been my approach. And it takes away a lot of just needless worry. And if you fail, you fail. And I think that, if you can think like a tech company, if you guys come up with an update and it doesn't work, no engineer is sitting there being like, I'm a loser, I'm a failure, I'll never make it again. It's like, oh, that update didn't go so well, let's fix it. So I think if you can begin to think like that, you can take a lot more risks, and some will totally flop, but others you might find huge success.
Yeah, that Control Z button, that edit undo is really, really valuable. You talked, maybe sort of to wrap this up, you and I both, where the Venn diagrams of Rebecca and Harley really meet around retail and commerce, and really sort of the future of this stuff. And when people talk to me, or I do podcasts, people ask, so you, of course, Harley, think the future of retail is online only. And I'm like, no, I absolutely do not think that that's the case. And I understand, because of my role at Shopify, that people assume that I think retail is going to be digitalized and that's all it's going to be. But actually, my version of the future of retail looks a lot more like consumer choice and a lot more like retail everywhere. And you live that. I mean, you sell, you have a wholesale business, you sell direct to consumer online, offline, you cross-sell on marketplaces and amazing places like China, for example. And what is your version of the future of retail?
I very much agree with you. It is retail everywhere. And I think that, brick and mortar has a purpose, and it's not just to sell product. It is to bring a customer into your world. And what does that world tell you? How does that world give you things outside of just a shopping experience? So whether it's a community experience, whether it's a marketing experience for a brand partner, whether it's to meet the designer who's in the store, as I often was before the pandemic. And so I think there's opportunities to sort of say, all right, it's not about how much sales we're doing per square foot in this store, and looking at it as, a whole entire ecosystem of all these different things that add up to one sort of number. And so I do think you're going to get it from the live streams we do to China, the live streams that I hope are going to come here soon, our website, our stores, and our other points of sale, which we still think are important. We just want the power structure to change, and it has since the pandemic started. So
yeah, I love that. Well, look, I can say my world is entrepreneurs, and I get a chance to talk to great entrepreneurs all the time. But let me just say this with full sincerity: you are one of my favorite entrepreneurs, Rebecca. And as a fanboy, but also just as as a small partner in all of this, I just want to say I am incredibly inspired by what you and Uri have done, and I'm inspired that you are creating this incredible flywheel to inspire more people to become entrepreneurs. I think that entrepreneurship is the greatest way to self-actualize, and I think the more we talk about it, the more we invite people to participate in this crazy thing, which is find really creative ways to solve interesting problems. I think it creates a much better world, and I'm so grateful you spent some time with me on the show today.
Thank you for having me. And it truly means a lot what you say. I don't know if you can relate, but on the days where you're having a bad day, you're like, oh, Harley told me that. Okay, I got this. So thank you.
Yeah, I feel that too. Thank you so much.